Hello, everybody. Welcome to Cacao With Me. Today we have a very special guest who is really gifted in the art of blending cosmic insights from astrology to the embodied practice of yoga. We have Seth with us today, who's also called the Stargazer. And what I really love about Seth's work is how he really blends astrological insights with breath, body, movement, and presence. And also, in my opinion, astrology can be very confusing and a lot to digest, but the way Seth really explains it makes it so easy to understand. So that is why I have Seth here today, for him to really share insights more about astrology and make it easy for us to understand. So thank you so much for joining, Seth. I'm going to allow you also to introduce yourself and then really walk us through your journey, what really brought you to astrology and your relationship with it from the beginning till how it is today.
Well, thank you. That's a very kind intro. And you really covered a lot of it. I'm an astrologer of now, I'm just thinking of how long it's been. It's been about 8 years. But it's been my kind of like full time business practice for the last six since 2020 and the pandemic when I launched the Stargazer, which is sort of an umbrella term for my business that is not just about offering astrology chart readings and different cosmic insights, but also a place for finding different outlets that help serve every pillar of health and well-being. So I'm a yoga teacher, I'm a breathwork teacher, a meditation teacher, and so all of those definitely go into what I'd like to offer and help people find more balance in what astrology can offer as like an introduction to self-awareness and self-understanding, but then also finding, like you said, a physical embodiment of that too. Um, but to answer your question, how I got here, how I found astrology, this all happened about 8 years ago when I was working in the fashion industry and I was 21 years old working at Vogue US in their editorial
Yeah.
department and just sort of like blown away by where I was at being 21 years old at the time.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, I was also pretty disheartened by it because it didn't necessarily match what I had thought it was going to be from a very young age and was searching for something that would give me more meaning and more access to what actually feels good. Because
Yeah.
what I've been sold is feeling good in this sector of like excess and privilege and fashion. I'm so grateful that one of my coworkers at the time was already a burgeoning astrologer and introduced me to it. And I became immediately hyperfixated and obsessed.
Yeah.
And over a process of years, daily study, reading a ton of books, talking to multiple different astrologers, going to conferences like NORWAC in Seattle to really learn from the source of so many of our older and wiser teachers, I was able to get a deeper understanding of the tradition since it's been around for literally thousands of years. I think that plays a role in why so many modern astrologers have these different perspectives on how to use it and work with it because there are truly innumerable applications from every cultural background in the world, which I just find amazing as a side note because it's like none of those people, whether they were in India or China or Europe or wherever else, were talking to each other and they were all creating their own astrology at the
Yeah.
same time. And we now get the benefit of getting all of those distilled in a way that allows us to alchemize it into a much more modern perspective. So I honor that. I practice Hellenistic astrology, which is very traditional in terms of using things like whole sign houses, traditional planetary rulerships, and not necessarily eschewing what modern astrology has given us. I like to create sort of my own practice, I guess, which is a blend of the two, but largely in the traditional side of things. It was about 2 years ago that I also did my yoga teacher training. And that incorporated the breath work, the meditation, the more embodied practices in my business. And that's definitely on the newer side. In my own personal practice, I've been doing yoga and all of these things since I was in high school. But it was only a couple of years ago that I decided to get serious about it and actually feel like I could teach what I was practicing. And so, what's kind of a big focus for me now is maybe this is a bit of a teaser, but coming later this year, I have a series of cosmic vinyasa videos that I'm working on where each yoga flow breathwork meditation is sequenced according to the moon sign that the moon is moving through at that moment. And I had so much fun building this roster over the last couple of years as I've found my footing in that side of things, and I'm excited to bring that into fruition.
I'm so excited to hear that. I would love to practice. Yoga with astrology sounds like a dream. So I'm so happy to
Yeah.
hear that you're actually doing that. That is amazing. Very exciting. So yeah, everyone, we gotta check that out. Do you have any timeline? I know time is like not real. So,
Yeah.
but do you have like any, just to give our viewers a little bit of this is when to
Yeah.
expect this?
It'll be I'm gonna be releasing it over the course of each zodiac season, starting in, like, the end of summer, early fall. So,
Awesome.
there's actually it's a pretty big project because it's, like, 24 videos. There's gonna be a short and a
Yeah.
long version for each sign, but, um, I'll definitely be sure to share it once they're out in the world.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. So, as everyone knows, a birth chart is basically just a map of the sky at the moment of your birth. And we have planets, zodiac signs, houses. So, what does each of these signify and how do they all come together and play?
Yeah. I definitely am not the first astrologer to use this analogy, but I have adopted it. I see the actors as the planets. So they are the most important element to start with and understand when you're getting to know your birth chart. It's why so many people are just familiar with their sun when they first get into things, because it is the most important planetary body in both the solar system and in our birth charts.
Mhm.
So they're the actors, and then the costumes that they're wearing are the zodiac signs that they're in. And that tells us what sort of persona they take on, what is their quality of expression. Some
Mhm.
planets like being in signs more than others. And we see that reflected in things like essential dignity, which is basically just is a planet in a sign that it rules, where it's really comfortable, or a sign where it is in detriment or in fall and it's maybe more uncomfortable and has to work even harder to get the goals that it wants to achieve in place. And then there's 12 houses, just like there's 12 signs. And each of those houses is the environment that they're putting this story into motion within. So it covers really all areas of human experience, all 12 houses, everything from what you do for work, what you experience in relationships, your home and family, your personal life, traveling, school. And I think the most fundamental part of understanding your birth chart in astrology is really once you get the actor in that costume in the environment that they're going to be in, it's not like a static, statuesque kind of situation. There are aspects that are formed or conversations that are happening at all times in both our birth chart and in the transiting sky, which really tell us about the
Mm.
narratives and the storylines that are being reflected to us in this cosmic mirror. It's interesting because that's also the one where I find most people have the hardest time understanding in astrology is sort of what these aspects mean and how to weave in sometimes multiple planets all aspecting each other all at once. But that's really where I find lately, especially, I've been loving to kind of deep dive into that more and help myself and other people understand the maybe more complexities of that because it doesn't have to feel as complex as maybe it seems.
Can you maybe give us a quick, like a rapid fire of what each house signifies, just so that we know exactly what
Yeah.
each of the houses are?
Yeah. Well, I think it's probably helpful to bucket it into the four groups of houses that there are. So, just like with zodiac signs, there are four elements, right? We've got fire, earth, air, and water. And most people can understand what that means when it comes to like the expression of the zodiac sign. Fire signs are more outgoing and energetic. Water signs are more introverted and emotional. When you think of the houses, you can sort of group them into four different buckets as well. You've got the first, the fifth, and the ninth houses, which are all parts of the chart that have to deal with your own personal experience of personal expression, of creative self expression, of learning about who you are and what your place in the world is in the context of a global environment, when you're traveling or studying. So they definitely make up the part of the chart that is about evolving and understanding our core identity and how we express that into the world. The second, sixth, and 10th houses are the work houses. So the second house shows you your gifts, your talents, your natural abilities that allow you to make money. And then you apply those things in the sixth house, which is a place that's all about literal work, your day to day habits, your routines, all the things that have to happen in sort of like a mundane way in order for you to reach your 10th house, which is a place of public image, of career, reputation, legacy. It's sort of the end product of whatever
Mhm.
you have been toiling away with on a daily basis using those second house gifts, talents, and abilities. So they all kind of work with each other in the same way that the self expression houses also kind of work with each other.
Mhm.
The third, seventh, and 11th houses are all parts of the chart that deal in our relationships. So the third house is that local environment, the people that you grew up around, siblings, cousins. But as you get older, it also tends to encompass your neighbors, people that you meet at the grocery store, on a walk around town, basically the people that are immediately around you. And then the seventh house deepens into a one on one relationship dynamic. And so for a lot of people, that is romantic relationships. But for many of us, what I've actually found my personal experience of this to be is largely about your best friends, the people that
Mm.
like can really shape your reality in even more significant ways sometimes than a romantic partner. It's any significant one-on-one dynamic. And sometimes that does even tend to like an enemy situation. I don't really see that very often, but that's an example of like in traditional astrology, they would call it the house of enemies. The last relationship house is the 11th house, which is a place where you find your group dynamics, the ones that you are choosing to participate in some sort of effort that goes beyond just your individual self. So, this for a lot of people has to do with like friendship groups of social
Mhm.
networks that they're participating in for environmental justice or social activism reasons. I always like to think about how in traditional astrology it's the house of hopes and dreams, because in modern astrology we call it this house of like groups of people that surround us, I think in part because the people that we surround ourselves with are the ones that influence us the most with what we're inspired by and hoping for in our own lives. And then the last set is the fourth, the eighth, and the 12th houses. This is where things get really interesting. The fourth house is the root and the foundation of the chart that deals in your experience of home and family, the foundational themes of just belonging. You can't really do anything if you don't have strong roots and a stable foundation from that place. When you go to the eighth house, you find a place of shared resources. So, on a surface level, it's other people's money, it's mortgages, loans, inheritances, debts,
Mhm.
all those things. But it's also called the house of sex, death, and rebirth. So, it holds other kinds of intangible resources that we share with other people as well. For some people, that has to do with sexual intimacy or vulnerability. For many of us, I might even go so far as to say for all of us, it has to do with the things that we were taught growing up that were impressed upon our psyche, which as
Mhm.
adults, we then end up needing to untangle what's ours versus what's not in an effort to create a life that feels like it's fully authentic to us and not just what we were told our life should look like or feel like when we were growing up by our family or our social
Mhm.
environment or just the culture in and around us.
Yeah.
That's where that idea of like transformation comes from.
Mm.
And then the 12th house wraps it all up. It's a place of endings, of closure, of deep introspection. I personally work with the 12th house a ton because it's such a good source for spiritual and mental health. We can really do a lot of solid work there to better equip ourselves so that we don't feel like we have to have it all figured out. It helps transcend the ego into a place
Mhm.
of divine surrender where we can know and support ourselves with this larger than us experience of collective consciousness. And I also have my sun and my chart ruler Mercury in my 12th house. So I just have a special affinity for that part of the chart.
First of all, thank you. That was very helpful because I didn't know you could group these, and that is actually very helpful. I think I'm gonna go, listen back to this and check my chart and understand some more aspects, but that is so
Yeah.
cool. What happens when, I've seen some people have some houses empty with no planets at all. Does that
Yeah.
matter? What does that mean?
This is such a great question because I'm literally writing a Substack article about it that I'm going to be putting out very soon. It's such a common question that I get, and it's a point where I find the most misinformation is given.
Hmm.
So many people ask, "Am I gonna be compatible with this person? Like, they're this sign, and I don't like that sign. It's not in my chart. I'm not good with it." And
Yeah.
every single time I hear that, I have to hold myself back a little bit because I'm like, you're also that sign. You have that in you and you express it somewhere in your chart.
Mm,
No matter who you are, we all contain all 12 signs, all the planets, all the houses within our birth charts, within ourselves. We are all these immensely complex, dynamic beings that hold multitudes. And we shouldn't use astrology to pigeonhole us into these boxes that say,
mm,
we're only this sign that our sun's in, or we're only the sign that our rising or moon is in.
yeah.
Once people can understand that the expression of that sign's character or costume comes through in a specific area of life, then it
Mm,
becomes easier to start to break away. For me, I have a Virgo rising and I have a pretty like evenly spread chart, I would say. But in my seventh house, which is a point of those one on one relationships, I don't have any planets. I only have my descendant line. But I find that when I'm in relationships, I am extremely Piscean in my character. I sort of dream of getting lost in the dynamic of love and connection and just sort of sharing everything in a way where it becomes really easy for me to kind of dissolve any boundaries and just like
mhm.
fully merge with that person, whether it's a best friend or somebody else. But you could apply this to any house in the chart. For you, I know you have, I think it's an empty second house where Cancer is. You don't have any planets in that part of your
Yeah, I
chart.
don't have an Aquarius, am I right? I don't know.
Aquarius, I
I feel
think, is
like
also empty for you. Yeah.
yeah. Mm.
And I think Libra is also empty for you in your fifth house. Um, all of these places might not have any planets in them, but you would express that characteristic of the zodiac sign in that house topic that it's occupying. So it
So wait,
is,
let me just ask you this. So if there is no planet
yeah,
there, and these are like big things, all these
yeah.
different big topics, is what does
Well,
that really mean?
yeah, it's so important to also remember that each planet rules a sign or sometimes two signs. So
Mm,
for example, with your Cancer second house, you would have to look at where your moon is because the moon is the planet that rules Cancer. So that would be a very important placement to understand how the expression of that second house that doesn't have any planets in it, but still is where Cancer sits in your chart, is actually related to and experienced.
mm,
So when you look at the planet that rules the sign, where there's like an empty house, then you really get the full picture. And you can even go so far as to layer in that ruling planet might also be making aspects to other planets, which
mm,
change the nature of its expression. So you can start by looking at where it's placed, but it's important not to stop there. You would want to also consider things like
mm.
the aspects it's making to other planets. Um, yeah, and sort of the full picture of the chart.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. You just mentioned compatibility. I had a conversation with a friend of mine, and she practices Vedic astrology, which is very different from
Yeah,
Western astrology. In India, there is this practice of even before considering marriage, they want to, check two people's horoscope and be like, oh, they're compatible. But she was just telling me how she thought it was ridiculous because the things that they check to see if they're compatible doesn't make sense, really. And she was like,
yeah,
there is no aspect of love and so many other things. So I just wanted to
yeah,
know, like, what are your thoughts? I see a lot of people these days, it's just based on sun sign. They're like, oh, this is compatible romantically or friendship or business, partnership. So what do
yeah.
you look for in terms of compatibility?
Yeah, this is such a good question. And I'm not an expert in Vedic astrology, but my approach to astrology has been to sort of weave together as much as I can from each of the different traditions that exist globally. I believe in Vedic, they really focus heavily on the north and the south node, or what's otherwise called is Rahu and Ketu, the head of the dragon and
Yeah.
the tail of the dragon. And those points and where they're placed in your partner's chart are a huge factor in the compatibility or lack thereof in the relationship. And that's definitely something that would be considered from the Western perspective as well. But what I like to focus on when I'm doing a synastry chart reading is whether or not the kind of timing is there for both individuals, as well as if there is a healthy amount of tension that
Mm-hmm.
allows for this kind of growth trajectory to happen together. Because what you don't want is for a chart that's entirely sympathetic, because it can feel like super easy and nice, but then it doesn't go anywhere. It just sort of like falls flat. You don't
Yeah.
get the kind of passion and tension that you need in order to really like stoke the passionate flames of the relationship
Yeah.
long term.
Yeah.
This is not a hard and fast rule, but I do find that the strongest compatibility often is based off of the modality of the rising sign. There are three modalities: there's cardinal signs, fixed signs, and mutable signs.
Hmm.
So the cardinal signs are the ones that start each season: Aries, Cancer, Libra, Capricorn. The fixed signs are the signs that sort of sit in the middle of each season. So Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius. And then the mutable signs are the ones that sort of shift you from one season into another, closing out those cycles. So Gemini, Sagittarius, Virgo, and Pisces. Finding somebody who has the same modality of a rising sign as you often ends up keeping your timing tight enough to where you guys actually will experience a lot of the same growth cycles together. So it makes it a little bit easier to continue a long term relationship because you're both sort of experiencing similar themes, but maybe in different directions. Almost my entire people of like in my orbit are either Sag rising, Gemini rising, Pisces rising. I'm a Virgo rising, so it's all mutable rising signs. It's not exclusive. I have so
Yeah.
many people who are Leo risings around me too as a fixed sign, but it's just one of those examples of if you can find that just as a starting point, that's already a really strong indicator that you're going to have more runway to work with than most.
Mm.
And then you can look to things like, are our moon signs compatible? Are our Venus and Mars signs compatible? You want to consider the relationship planets, Venus and Mars, as well as the moon for that sense of emotional safety and security when you're thinking of relationship compatibility.
Okay. Got it. That makes sense. Let me see.
Can I ask you
I
a
think it would
question?
be yes, go for it.
Uh, I'm really curious because, like you said earlier when we first met, you didn't really know your moon or your rising sign. And so now 5 years later, as a student and somebody who has had multiple chart readings, has done whatever self-study I know you've done on your own time, how has your relationship to it changed and how has your understanding of it changed?
Oh my God. I would say I literally knew nothing about astrology, and now I keep track of things. I keep track of where the different planets are and what that means for my chart. And I
Mm,
try not to rely on it in the sense I try not to let it control my day or my mood or what to
mm,
expect. But it's still so useful to have it at the back of my head because it's like, oh, I will feel extra tired during these, weeks or it's usually weeks. And I have so much more understanding about my emotions and honestly the way people perceive me because I had no idea about my rising at all. For me, it was always
mm.
I'm Taurus, Taurus, Taurus. But once I understood my rising, it's like, oh, okay. People are
Yeah,
not seeing me as a Taurian. And moon is a whole nother thing. Your moon is your emotion. So getting to know my moon has been so big. I think also things like, I think it's been less than a year since I'm understanding Venus better and Mars and Mercury, and these really play a part. So
yeah,
it's been a journey. I mean, I'm just learning about it, but it's so interesting. I love I love reading about astrology and so yeah, I think I'm learning a lot about also just, what to expect in the world with the way everything is changing. And yeah, I think it's amazing for people who actually practice astrology. You kind of can somewhat predict things before it happens, which is a
yeah.
gift.
Yeah, it speaks to just like nothing is new. Everything is just a
Yeah.
repeated cycle of something that's already happened before, but through the context of more modern experience. And I really love that you say, even after all of these years, you're still finding new ways of looking at and understanding some of your personal placements, like your Mercury or your Mars,
Yeah.
because it's so important to remember that the benefit of astrology is you get to sort of completely uncover all these different elements of who
Yeah.
you are at your core. But also, that changes over time as you get older and you become more confident in who you are. And so, even years after learning about astrology, I had the same experience where it was like I was relating to something like my moon sign totally different than when I first started
Hmm.
learning about astrology and was kind of being told what it meant. So, yeah, it's a cool experience to go through when you're sort of constantly reorienting yourself around these things.
Yeah. Yeah, actually I think that's a great segue. I would like for you to explain to our viewers, especially the brand new people who are like, wait, what is rising? What is moon? Because I was there too.
Oh,
What does the sun, moon, and rising represent in our chart, but also in our
yeah.
personality and how people view us? Yeah.
So I think it's such an important distinction between the rising sign and the sun sign to make. Your sun sign is how you see yourself. That is your inner experience of identity that throughout our lifetime, the work of our sun placement is bringing that sense of inner self into an outer expression. For some of us, this actually does happen based off of something called progressions in our
Mm-hmm.
chart. But for others, if you have your sun in the same sign as your rising sign, it can be really easy and natural to express the way that you see yourself outwardly without any friction at all. And so, yeah, that can already be sort of a much different experience than somebody like you or I who have their sun in the 12th house. And it might just take a longer period for us to be able to bring that Taurian nature, or for me, the Leo sun, into the rising sign energy. Because the rising sign is very much the personal image, the exterior of how everything gets filtered. I really love thinking about it as the energy of when you wake up in the morning, you take a shower, and you get ready for the day. When you go to your closet, what are you picking out? How do you decide to do your hair, if at all? Are you doing your makeup? Like all the thoughts and decisions that go into that process of putting yourself together for a new day is very much what the rising sign is all about. It holds more than just the surface layer, though. It's also a place
Yeah.
of you can really find like core motivators. For example, me being an earth sign rising, anyone else who's Taurus or Capricorn rising would likely relate to this. The primary motivating factor for me in so many of my big life decisions is rooted in what's going to afford me security, stability, and that experience of like groundedness. I often am envious of actually my fire rising sign friends who are like Leo or Sag risings who are so easily able to take a risk and do
Yeah.
something really like confidently without ever having done it before. For you, you're an air rising. The way that you might be motivated is going to be more oriented around the exchange of information, about acquiring knowledge to make informed decisions. There's
Yeah.
definitely much more of a social socially based decision making that takes place compared to some of the other elements that are rising signs. Learning from your friends, your family, your peers, just in being in conversation with people would be a really helpful way of better understanding yourself. And then, of course, sort of the decisions that you would make in a bigger scale kind of way. And then the moon. I can't forget about the moon. This is
Yeah.
the emotional undercurrent that underscores everything. Every human being, again, experiences the full spectrum of emotional experience. Some moon signs are perhaps more intense than others. You can kind of see the ebb and the flow of how we experience happiness, anger, sadness, frustration, etc., based off of the sign that the moon is in. So for
Mm.
me, I have my moon in Scorpio, a place where it's actually considered to be in fall. And Scorpio is a water sign that's not actually one to express its emotions outwardly. So even though my whole life I've had very extreme emotional experiences where I sort of latch on to a feeling and I like to hold it for longer than maybe I
Mm-hmm.
should. A lot of my therapy and adult work has been on working and untangling that. It'd be like I get so drawn into being bluesy that I would just sort of like listen to music and do things that would keep me in that blue feeling,
Yeah.
and that's very Scorpio in nature to kind of be fixed on something, even when it's an emotion that is meant to be temporary and just sort of like move through and out of you. It also shows us sort of you can't do anything with your chart until you start with your moon. Because from a
Mm.
practical perspective, how are you supposed to be successful at work, have thriving relationships, or do these kind of outward experiences building your life productively if you feel depressed or
Yeah.
overly anxious or your emotional state is just in this sort of perpetual chaos. So,
Mm.
working with the moon as an entry point to find that balance and the emotional expression, not hiding from or resisting anger or any of the harder, sadder emotions, but rather knowing how to work with them better with your own emotional response. And the moon sign and the aspects that the moon are making in your birth chart can give you a lot of insight about how to do that. I know for me with a water moon, one of the best ways to get out of a funk is to take a hot bath. It's very literal.
Mm.
It's like me being in hot water when Scorpio is a sign that is hot water is sort of like this magical thing that makes me feel like I'm sort of cleansed and reborn when I'm out of it. I can sort of start with a clean slate. Um, for you have a moon.
Yeah.
So activities that might get you out of your head and into your body and some sort of like
Mm.
physical expression, whether that's walking or doing exercise or a yoga class or just something that sort of gets all of that physical heat out of the body might be a better outlet for you to kind of find that emotional balance and stasis.
Nice. Okay, let me ask you this. When you get a chart, is there any top three things that you, based on all the charts you've read, you just like checking these three things first? Is there anything like that that kind of gives you an idea of
Yeah.
the person you're gonna talk to?
Yeah. Well, we were talking about the sun, moon, rising, but what I really look at as like the most important planet is always the chart ruler. So the planet that rules the rising sign is like that's the planet
Mm,
behind your inner steering wheel. If you've seen that movie Inside Out, I think that's a fabulous representation of what kind of happens with the birth chart, where you can see all these emotions in the movie are basically the same thing as looking at all these planets inside of you.
mm,
And one of those planets in the movie, it's joy, but in your birth chart, it's the chart ruler. They are the one who has
mm,
the final say over the switchboard of what's happening in your experience and expression. So we are both ruled by Mercury. And so what Mercury is doing at any given moment is like paramount to our personal experience. That's why I really like how you said earlier, your timing tends to swing in the number of weeks because that's very
mm.
Mercury. For somebody who's a
Oh,
Cancer
okay.
rising, having the moon be their chart ruler might mean that they experience that each day is a different experience because the moon is changing signs so frequently. But then somebody who's ruled by Jupiter or Saturn or slow moving planets, they might have 1 year of like accelerated growth and be feeling really good. But then another year, it's like everything sort of comes to a halt and they're
Mm.
not getting that same sort of coming and going of like momentum and need for rest and clarity and all the things that sort of keep us on our path.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't realize that. I mean, I knew my chart ruler is Mercury, but I didn't realize the few weeks aspect of that. So that is nice to know. Okay, so let me ask you this. I'm just asking based off of all the different charts that you've read and whatever research you have done, is there specific things you've seen tied to certain signs? I'm just throwing an example. For
Yeah.
instance, oh, Leo risings are really meant to be leaders. They're really good in a leadership role. Have you seen anything like that specific to signs?
It's less so about what sign is like the rising sign. What definitely stands out more is if there is ever a planet placed on an angle in the chart, that always jumps out to me very loudly because there are four angles in a chart. There's your ascendant, the most important angle, because it's the only place in the entire birth chart that is specifically solely about you. But then
Mm-hmm.
on the opposite side of that is the descendant angle, the relationship angle. But then there's also the midheaven, the brightest, uppermost part of the chart that typically corresponds to our public image or career reputation. And then, of course, on the opposite of that is the root point in our chart that's about our private image, our sense of safety and home and belonging and all of that. So, whenever there are planets really close to any of those angles, it's a very clear indicator that that person is going to embody that planet very strongly. I have this in
Mm,
my own birth chart. I have my Venus right at the exact same degree as my midheaven in Gemini. So that's really the only planet in my whole chart that's really close to one of those angles. And so even though I'm a Virgo rising, even though I'm a Leo sun, I more than most will identify as a Gemini because that Venus on my midheaven is so loud and prominent, where
mm,
I sort of find it's such a gift that I have found in my chart because I can sort of embody Venus in the work that I do, whether that's making my own art, whether it's yoga or drawing or astrology or writing or any of these things. I get so many different outlets to be creative in.
mm,
And my favorite part of it was what I found is in my close relationships, I find that it allows me to also act as sort of like a muse for my friends. I've always said in that area of my life. My greatest aspiration is to be a muse for one of my creative friends to create something that just like connects us in a
So
way that,
nice. Yeah.
art is sort of eternal. I actually have an example of this literally right here. So I have this sculpture
Oh,
of
wow.
a little lemon head. His name is Lil Sweetie, and he was born out of conversations that I had with my old roommate who is a sculptor and an artist. And she
Wow.
has a whole collection of like fruit and planet based sculptures. I love that there is an example like that. And there are more as well, just of what happens when you are encouraging creativity with your friends and then you inspire each other and then you get to sort of like keep it or honor it in some way.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite things about having Venus right on top of my midheaven. It'd be different though if you had Mercury or your sun or another planet configured to an angle. Any planet that would be on the midheaven is going to be the most visible or easy to see and understand. Somebody who has a planet on their root in their lower part of their chart would be much harder to see. And that
Mm.
doesn't take away the importance or the intensity that it might be felt. It just changes the way that you would relate to it in the context of how you're being perceived, because it might not be something that people perceive about you as much
Mm.
as the, yeah, midheaven.
Yeah. Got it. There's just so many aspects to astrology, which takes years and years. And even then, you're like, oh my God, there's just so much more to uncover. Actually, I was really
Yeah,
curious about your thoughts on how does your birth chart relate to your past lives? First of all, do you believe in your new birth being like a reason to continue or take care of some unfinished business from the past life and lives, I
yeah,
should say, probably. But do you think astrology shows us a little bit about that?
it does. I I also am like a big believer in reincarnation and
Yeah.
cycles of lifetimes that we experience through the lens of our eternal soul.
Mm,
Um, this is one of the reasons why I actually started asking people to call me Soul, SOL,
mm,
a few years ago because I gave that name to the part of myself that feels like the eternal passenger inside.
sun.
Whereas Seth, as my name that's given to me by my family from birth, is much more about my identity in this lifetime.
You connect your name soul to the sun. Is that
I
the
do. Yeah.
reason? Okay. Yeah.
It's
And you're a
it's connected to the
Leo,
sun.
right?
I'm a Leo, so the sun is my favorite.
Yep.
Um, but it sounds like soul phonetically, so there's also that
Which is
element of I like that it conveys a certain amount of soulfulness, and I take a lot of inspiration from drag queens too, because I love how they get to choose this character that is sort of
fun.
all the best parts about them. And sometimes it even includes parts that feel harder to access when you're sort of operating from a place of what was given to you.
Mm,
So that's a huge part of it as well. It just gives me more access to being louder, prouder, and sort of like in the branding a little bit more. Um, yeah. So to answer your question, astrology definitely gives us a few different windows into the karmic themes and lessons that we are working through based off of this current lifetime, past lifetimes, and it probably could continue for future lifetimes as well.
yeah.
You would definitely want to look to the North and the South Node as a primary
Mm,
source of information for that, because the North Node is really about what is our appetite for soul growth in this particular lifetime? What do we need to kind of push ourselves into a space of discomfort in order to have that experience of growth? And
mm,
then the opposite end, the South Node, tells us what is really comfortable and familiar to us sort of innately from a very young age, which indicates that there are themes that we're carrying over from past lives that give us
mm,
this innate sense of ability. I don't think it's a coincidence that there are children out there who are like extremely gifted at playing the piano or, having these different things that children normally don't have.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's just one example. There are so many, I think, that kind of carry through, but the South Node is going to not be a place that we need to necessarily demonize, but it is important not to let ourselves get too comfortable in it, because then it becomes a situation where, especially during eclipse seasons, where these points are very activated, we can find ourselves being pushed rather than what we should be focusing on, which is sort of letting ourselves be pulled towards that highest path and greatest good.
Mm.
Beyond the south node, though, you could also look to what sign is on your 12th house cusp, because again, that is the point in the chart that is about endings and closure. And so it also represents the moment just before you're born into your physical body in the first house. And that can
Mm,
give a lot of really interesting insight to the characterization of a more recent past life. And then the third and final one I would say is Chiron as a really interesting placement to learn more about past life stuff too, because it is the wounded healer archetype. And it speaks very directly to the universal traumas that we all experience in childhood just by nature of growing through adolescence and growing up. But it also speaks to some of the deeper wounds that might exist on a soul level that are really rooted in sort of healing themes that we're working through throughout our entire lifetime. So there's a compounding effect to that, but I find there's usually a lot of similarity between the Chiron, the North Node, the South Node, sort of like all these themes that are not about external styles of growth. It's not about making more money, getting more
mm,
things, having a certain amount of success or notoriety. It is more about karmic soul level themes of, do I know what my purpose is? How am I expressing my purpose? How is that impacting people around me? Am I leaving things better than I found them?
mm,
Yeah, it's more rooted in this sense of universal connection and love and dharma.
yeah,
Yeah, you can get a lot out of the past life experience out of that, and it can really help for just understanding how to navigate your present life better, I guess.
yeah. I wanted to ask you, do you think looking at your chart, you can really figure out your purpose, or is that just an illusion?
Absolutely. And I don't think it's limited to just one thing either. I think for many of us, maybe there's an end goal that's singular, but there might be a lot of different ways that you can actually go about embodying, actualizing what your purpose is. And it definitely
Mm,
starts with what's going on where the North Node is at in the chart. Like that's such a hugely important part of the chart to know and understand because that's going to give a lot of insight into what that highest path karmic lesson and theme is going to be that might need to be embraced a little bit
mm,
more. What's interesting about your chart is actually how I think your south node is also in your 12th house. So there's sort of like a doubling down on the past life themes as it relates to what's going on in the Taurus part of your chart, which would mean that
mm,
your north node is in Scorpio in your 6th house, which is also where you have a couple other placements. And I think one of the reasons why I would interpret what you said earlier about feeling as though what you heard with your past lives is what you still are sort of looking to do now is also because you have your sun in Taurus in the 12th house, where your south node is, where these themes of past lives are being held for you. And then the sun is about this work that we're doing in this lifetime. So it may very well be that there are important aspects of what you experienced in those past lives that are carrying through into this lifetime. And I don't think that we should come into a new life and then look at past lives as something that needs to be sort of scratched or erased
mm,
or forgotten. You know, we wouldn't be here if our ancestors didn't do all of these things to get us here.
yeah,
So honoring and kind of weaving in the aspects of those past life interpretations or understandings is the same idea as what I would do to sort of honor my grandparents, their grandparents, and all the things that they did to immigrate and then set up their children's lives to be a bit better.
mm,
There are things that I can do to sort of honor that.
yeah,
But that doesn't necessarily take away maybe the importance of also looking at what is your responsibility in this lifetime for continuing to add to that?
mm,
And that's where the
yeah,
North Node comes through. I think you can still work with and live through a lot of the South Node, 12th house, past life, Taurus sun qualities while also
mm.
adding in flavors of the Scorpio 6th house where you have your North Node.
Wow. Lot to think about, lot to integrate, I think. But yeah, I always find it so interesting, just thinking about all the different adventures that the soul has had before, where it
Yeah.
is right now. And
Oh, yeah.
also, I do believe that, the soul has already decided on everything. It knows the entire
Mm.
script of what is going to play out in this life. And there is a specific reason we choose our partners, our parents, our friends, or anyone we meet at any point. So all of that kind of makes me feel like I trust that my soul picked a kick ass script. So I'm sorted. Doesn't matter what the present moment is, but it's going to be
Yeah.
awesome long term. Yeah.
Yeah. I absolutely agree with that. If you haven't already, there's an incredible series of books by Dr. Michael Newton called Journey of Souls, Destiny of Souls, Wisdom of Souls. They're all the same thing, which is case studies about his experience bringing patients into past life hypnoregression. And there are these universal experiences that are the same for every single case study. And one of the most prominent in them is exactly what you just described, where there's a moment before the current lifetime where that soul chooses the life that they want to live. They choose the experiences that they want to be presented with, good and bad. And
Mm,
I also take a lot of comfort in that because it helps me remember that my free will isn't taken away from me just because there is this quality of destiny or fate that is sort of woven into the fabric of our human experience. I think it speaks to how there is a really key difference between knowing something to be true intellectually and then actually doing it and experiencing it. Because when you are moving through that experience, just because you know what's going to happen doesn't mean that your instinct to act and do certain things in that moment is going to be perfect or it's going to be preordained. That's the work, I think,
mm,
of being
yeah.
in each physical lifetime is pushing ourselves to see, will we take action? Will we do
Mm,
something that feels foreign or uncomfortable? Will we
yeah.
do the things that help us to grow? If not,
Mm,
it's okay because then maybe we get another chance at the next lifetime. There's
yeah.
no, at the end of the lifetime, if you're doing a self-review, no one's gonna be harder on you than yourself. We hold ourselves, I think, to our highest standard, and I would hate if people only listen to the standards that were given to them by culture
Mm,
or social norms. I think of
yeah.
how I'm turning 30 this year, and I feel so grateful that I'm in a position where I don't necessarily feel the pressures that a lot of my peers have faced, where
Mm,
there's this need to like have your entire life figured out. You have to have
mm,
a marriage or children. You have to have a home that you've bought or a career that you're already at the top of. And I'm like, that is such a wild expectation to put on
I
the
know.
shoulders of a human being that is still like a child in many
A
ways.
child, yes.
So yeah, I hope that more people can lean into how astrology in particular gives us this really beautiful new perspective on timing in our lives.
Mm,
The best example of that is how technically your adulthood doesn't really officially start until after your Saturn return ends, which for me isn't until I turn 32. And even more so than that, the real container of adulthood starts at 36 for everybody. And from 36 to 47 is this period of like 12 years where you are acting as an adult through the experiences that you've tried, experimented with in your youth. But so many people find themselves, I think, pushing against all these things that they feel pressured to do so early on in life that they end up having to start over, sometimes from
yeah.
scratch, when they get to that timing of like 36 or late 30s, sometimes even early
Mm,
40s. And I mean, this is where the midlife crisis comes in. It's like people feel like they need to completely do things differently on their own
yeah.
terms, which hopefully they are able to do because there's no moment in life where you can't start over or you can't do things differently. It's just
Yeah.
if more people had the lens of astrology, they might catch on to it sooner and get to enjoy it for
Yeah.
longer.
Yeah, but there is this I wouldn't call it stigma anymore, but there is this perspective that people are like, "Oh my God, please, astrology, these astrology girls." I've heard that so many times like, "Oh, please, it's not even real. It's not even true." And it's just so sad because they're missing out so much information that is
Yeah.
true and real and been around for thousands of years. And honestly, look up in the sky, like it's real. So what do you mean? But I think
Yeah.
it's getting better.
It is. I mean, even just 10 years ago, people would have no idea what you mean when you ask, what's your big three? Like, what is the difference between your
Yeah.
rising sun and moon? People would not have gotten that.
Yeah.
Now, there's such a huge and continuing to grow culture around astrology and the understanding and awareness of it. And that comes with what you just described people who are equally going to reject it and
Mm,
demonize it. And that's
yeah.
just sort of, I think, a normal process with anything that ebbs and flows in popularity.
Yeah.
But the good thing about astrology is that it has survived thousands of years, and a couple of people who
Yeah.
say that it's not real is not going to do anything
Yep.
to it.
That's true.
It's like it's survived the
Yeah.
fall of civilizations, of regimes, of countries. It's existed in all areas of the world without any of those areas talking to each other.
Yeah.
It's indestructible because of what you just said. You just have to look up. That's what every
Yeah.
human being does. and we
Yeah.
all make meaning from that experience. And it just so happens that this particular blueprint is standardized. We've got the benefit of it being refined over millennia so that it's not a perfect science, but it is a really beautiful art form that is scientific in many ways.
Yeah. Have you ever felt confused by your path in astrology or just astrology in general? Like you believed in something for so long and then a new book or something you read or a different type of astrology from a different part of the world and it completely
Yeah.
contradicted something you had learned before?
I was really, really struggling in the early years trying to reconcile the different house systems that exist in astrology because there are so many, like
Mm.
dozens of different house systems to choose from. And one of the really popular ones is called Placidus. I use whole sign house systems, which are part of Hellenistic traditional astrology, but Placidus also has its value. It's primarily used astronomically. I wouldn't say astrologically.
Okay.
So I was really thrown because your Placidus birth chart typically looks very different than your whole sign house birth chart.
Mm.
And I was getting really conflicting things when I was looking at it. Only later, once I had committed and tested into whole sign versus Placidus, it was so consistent. Every single time a planet ingressed into a new sign, immediately there were giveaways that something was going on, which never was the case when a planet ingressed into a new sign using Placidus.
Mm.
So the timing of it was one of those keys of like helping me gain more confidence. But then the other piece was just remembering that no matter the differences between your birth chart through the lens of Placidus or whole sign or any other house system, it's that idea that we talked about earlier where you still hold every sign, every planet.
Mm.
Like you contain the entirety of the zodiac and the solar system and everything that goes into this study within your birth chart. And just because it slightly changes from one system to another doesn't change that you hold all of that. And that helped me feel like, okay, I don't need to worry so much about some of the specificity of things because we're always sort of unfurling it further and further as we get older.
Yep.
Thankfully, though, I will say for the most part, it's always felt very clear to me from a very early age that this was going to be what I did. And
Wow.
I actually remember, I'm remembering this right now. There was a night pretty early on when I remember laying in bed thinking to myself, wow, so if I choose to do astrology, there are going to be some pretty significant implications for this in my relationships, in my career, in
Yeah.
everything that I choose to do in life. And I was a little overwhelmed by that thought at the time. But even still, it didn't change the sense of clarity I felt of like, there's no other choice. Like, this is something that I feel rooted so deeply in my sense of being, where it's probably something that stems from a past life, where this
Yeah.
can't be the first lifetime I'm coming into where
Yeah.
I'm engaging with this tool and this practice because it's something that just feels so natural at this point.
Yeah. So when you say that you had this thought that this is going to deeply impact every relationship or career that you do, is it because of the nature of astrology or was it something else?
I think it had to do with the fact that I, at that time, was so conditioned to believe that my life had to look a certain way. Where
Mm.
if I wanted to be in a successful romantic relationship, I had to be in a successful, popular career like fashion or tech or something that was like shiny. And yeah, then there's also the element of just there is a far fewer number of people who have charted their own course in a path of work like astrology than there is for a lot of the other industries. So reconciling with the fact that like I would be responsible for carving my own path through astrology. I mean, it still is in many ways sort of nerve wracking because there's not as many
Mm.
blueprints that I can follow for how to be successful. So it was more just sort of reconciling what I was conditioned to believe at that time and what I'd been able to now grow more so into, which is just my own sort of I am creating my own life. I'm the only one living in my own reality. I'm not going to
Yeah.
subject myself to any of the kind of structures or systems that are kind of put onto us at all times
Mm.
from all angles, which is constantly, a tug of war tension wise.
Yeah. So this is just based on my observation. I don't know if this is true in any way or form, but what I've noticed is that within Vedic astrology, I see that it's predominantly male dominant, whereas Western
Whoa.
astrology, I've noticed it's more females, but I don't know if it's actually true because this is something I've noticed a lot. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I haven't thought about it a lot, but you're so right. It is. it's rare for me to find other astrologers who aren't women. They definitely exist, and I would say a lot of them are older.
Mm,
And I am so grateful for conferences that exist like NORWAC and others because they kind of bring all those people together in one room so you can really see the full spectrum. Yeah, it's interesting to think about though how maybe it's because in the West, it's a culture where, women are already put on their back foot in many ways. And so it might
mm,
be easier for them to adopt and express an alternative thing like astrology compared to men who might feel more predisposed. And I'm talking very generally here, but
yeah.
more predisposed to just resisting that.
Mm,
Because I think of like the other male presenting astrologers who I know, and almost all of them are queer. And
mm,
it's sort of like maybe getting access to it in a culture where it's not exactly widely celebrated or embraced yet requires having a certain kind of tenacity that is
mm.
probably more easily accessed via queer people and women than it is straight men. Whereas I feel, and please tell me if I'm wrong here in any way, but in Vedic astrology in India, I would assume that it's honored a little bit more. Like the tradition goes back much more
I think
clearly
so,
in
yeah.
that history. And so there's not as much of a stigma around it. I mean, it's like what you said, where people before they get married will hire the astrologer to make sure that the chart's like, they're not doing that over here.
Yep.
I don't think.
Yeah, it's a big thing in India, like mostly within Hindus. And I found it interesting that it's always a man. I want to
Mhm.
see the Indian female astrologers too.
Yeah.
It's so rare, which is why when I find a woman in astrology practicing Vedic astrology, I'm just, well, very interested.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think, like you said, I've noticed in Western culture, it's mostly, queer men or just women. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's just interesting.
Do you do you know, is that the same thing for yoga practitioners in India? Do you find that it's predominantly male driven or is it more balanced?
It's actually very interesting because I would like to think it's balanced, but to be very honest with you, especially when you go to yoga schools. So I also got my yoga teacher training done just last October, and all my teachers were male. Now, I don't know if it's a school specific thing, but I also looked into other schools. It's like if there are five male teachers, there's one female teacher, which I find very shocking because I honestly expected more women in yoga than men. 'Cause, I mean, you open YouTube, for instance, you're gonna see it's all women, in yoga, you know what I mean? And even in
Yeah.
the States, if you're dropping into a class, it's 90% women teachers with some male. I've attended classes with male teachers too, but in India, I was a little shocked because I thought there would be more female teachers in the,
Yeah.
classes. I don't know why it was, though. Like, do you have any insights on that?
I mean, it just makes me think of what we were talking about with the astrology of it all. I don't think that they're that different in
Mm,
terms of the difference
mm.
culturally in these two different areas of the world. And it's also, not just teachers. When I go to yoga classes at studios, it's also, I think, like 90% women and 10% men.
Oh,
I haven't
yeah?
been to any, yeah, I haven't been to any yoga classes in India, but I would imagine that just based off of there being more men perceived as teachers, that naturally makes it feel more comfortable for men to join as students. I don't know. This is something that I can't wait to explore more of and go to India and actually experience it firsthand, do a training over there, get more of the experience because it is something that is it's interesting. There are cultural differences, but there are also just differences
Yeah.
based off of how old each country is. America is so young, and so we don't get to enjoy any of the benefits that India does with I mean, you can go to the birthplace of civilization basically, and you're still
Yeah,
gonna
yeah.
find Indian culture there. So, yeah, it'd be really fascinating to see sort of what some of those differences are from the lens of a teacher, of a student, for yoga, for astrology, and anything else that might come through.
Yeah, I think especially for yoga, studying it from birthplace, I would highly I mean, I had that thing when I was leaving the States, I'm gonna do my yoga teacher certification only in India because just going to the source, so maybe for 300 you
Yeah.
can go to India.
Honestly,
That'd
that
be
would be
amazing.
such a dream. That would be such a dream. Yeah. My first yoga teacher training I did in Peru, in the Sacred Valley, but then when I do my 300, I'm definitely looking at India for that because it is well, it's also just an excuse to sort of get out of
Yeah.
America for a little bit, and
Yeah.
like you said, go to the source, get it from the root of things, and it also is just I love traveling and getting a break from the American lifestyle for
Yeah.
any amount of time that I can.
I am going to be mindful of our time. I think this is a very important one that I would like to give you some time to talk about. But do you think there are any upcoming significant astrological transits happening that is going to bring a big shift in the collective consciousness? Can you share that?
Yeah, absolutely. We are moving through a period of time that is truly unprecedented. We don't have any written history of what's coming, astrologically speaking. We have pieces of it, but not the
Mm,
full picture. Essentially, as of July of this year, we're going to be in a configuration of outer planets that is extremely powerful. The last time we saw it was at the end of the 18th century when we had the French Revolution, the American Revolution, the Industrial Revolution. It was this period of incredible, accelerated growth and pursuit of freedom in a revolutionary way. And that's a lot of what's happening as of this summer is going to start a lot of the same things, but of course, through the cycle that is now in a more modern time. So
mm,
essentially, what's happening is Jupiter is going to go into Leo as of June 30th of this year. And for the full year that it's in Leo, it's going to be activating the outer planets and all of the new signs that they have moved into over the course of the last couple of months and years themselves. So immediately it forms an opposition to Pluto and Aquarius. That's one of the big ones because obviously that was where it was when America was founded. It's going to form a
mm,
trine aspect to Neptune and Saturn over in Aries, which is this configuration of planets that's really trying to bring dreams into reality for younger generations, trying to reconcile with systems that need to be broken down and dissolved, while also very courageously creating their own systems that they can work from in ways that are liberating from these sort of
mm,
historical systems that were sort of born in that period 300 or so years ago. And then it's also forming a sextile to Uranus and Gemini. For the next 6 years, that transit being activated for the first year by Jupiter is really about these insane, accelerated developments that we're going to experience in everything from how we communicate and engage with each other all around the world to things like space travel and just generally the kind of technological innovation world, which I mean, undoubtedly is also going to be connected to our phones, our computers, the way that we
mm,
consume and spread information is going to go through a rapid evolution. We've only really been in the sort of technology age for a couple of decades, but the next 5 to 7 years are going to be probably some of the biggest leaps that we'll make technologically, which I believe, knowing what I know from like astrological transits, is going to correspond to actually giving younger generations more power and agency to create the structures that they need to use because it's by adopting that technology that they'll be able to create those systems for themselves more easily than older generations who might have a harder time adopting it as easily and seamlessly. But also, none of this is going to happen cleanly or softly. I mean, we're talking about dismantling systems that have been around for centuries and exposing corrupt positions of power that people have been abusing
mm.
for a really long time. And all of that isn't just going to go away. It's going to be a pretty messy process that will involve conflict, and there's not a dystopian future on the other side of this where everything is perfect either. It's sort of coming to terms with the reality like there's always going to be a shadow side to our collective reality. It's just a matter of what we're willing to accept within that and where it needs to change and where it's absolutely destined to change. I think ultimately just knowing that the astrology of this summer is so radical and leads us into a period for a few years that will empower younger generations is more than enough to instill a sense of hope and courage to move through it. Every time I open up social media, it's like I'm sort of oppressed by the news
Yeah.
cycle in a way that makes me feel powerless or
Mm,
overwhelmed or
yeah.
in despair about it all, and that's really not the right energy to be moving into.
Yeah. I'm opening social media or news these days is such a scary thing to do with everything that's going on and everything that's being shared so ruthlessly. But what you were talking about, how, there's going to be a change in the systems and I think just way of being, I feel like we're already seeing it. I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of people are moving from 9 to 5 structures. And I think even politically, if you think about it, we know more about the truth and everything that's happening in the world
Yeah.
more than ever before. So
Yeah.
I think it's very interesting to see where all of this is going to lead.
The big thing that most astrologers have predicted that with Uranus and Gemini, during that 6-year period of time is when we're most likely to experience the singularity event, where artificial intelligence gains consciousness. And that impact is sort of what movies have been made about for
Yeah,
decades. There are
exactly.
so many possibilities that could happen from that. And to me, that is the point where I'm like, AI is really just a mirror to our own human reality because it's being programmed by human beings and it's
Mm,
learning from old information that we are feeding it from the internet and other
mm,
sources. And so there are a lot of really wild things that that could translate into and mean, but we're not going to get there probably for another couple of years. So we'll just
yeah.
have to wait and see.
Yeah, I mean, all these scary movies are coming true, so yeah, we're ready for it. We've seen it, I guess. I
Absolutely.
think before you leave, what is one truth about astrology that you think the world is not ready to hear yet?
Oh. Probably that astrology has consistently tracked the rise and fall of civilizations and leaders of those civilizations quite successfully. And so I don't know that people are entirely ready to hear and acknowledge that because
Mm, yeah,
it's a pretty confronting truth, but it's pretty reliable when you go and do the research and you track those
yeah,
cycles yourself.
yeah. Thank you for that. I'm just going to ask you one last thing. So, let's say anyone who's listening to this, they're really interested in learning more about astrology and getting, maybe even getting into the path of astrology and practicing it. So, what is an advice you can give them, and if any practices
Yeah.
or any instructions you can give them to get started?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, I always recommend booking a chart reading with a professional astrologer because as much as you can do self-study online, it doesn't really hold a candle to somebody who has that experience and expertise. It's not going to replace your own study and education, but I think it can be such a valuable resource in the middle of that self-study. I also always recommend the app Time Passages. I think it is the best astrology app out there. It's the simplest, and they give such in-depth descriptions of what each planet, placement, aspect means in both your birth chart and the transits that are going on at any moment, and it's free. So I just think it's a very accessible tool that has helped me personally with my astrology journey a lot. Generally, just like starting with tracking the moon is more than enough for people to do. Track where the
Mm,
moon is in, write how you feel that day, what's coming up for you. And then over a period of a couple of months, once you've gotten a few different examples for the moon in each sign multiple times, you'll start to clock the synchronicities and things that are coming up time and time again when the moon is in the same sign doing the same thing month to month.
wow, that is actually great insight. To track the moon and your emotions with that. Yeah, that's a good one. Thank you so much, Seth. As always, I love talking to you, your energy and your presence. I'm so grateful for you and for you to join this today. Before you go, is there any last things you want to share with us?
Well, thank you for having me. I have always enjoyed talking with you, and it's such a gift to also be connected to somebody for so long. I mean, I'm still kind of racking my brain for how it's already been 5 years since we first met. That is so wild to me, but like so grateful for it. And this is my favorite thing to talk about and engage with anytime. So it's truly my pleasure. I would just plug my site. My offerings are open. I'm available for bookings throughout the spring, and later in the summer, I'll be sharing those cosmic vinyasa yoga videos with meditation and breathwork included. So keep an eye out for those. If you're in the New York area, you're welcome to connect with me. I'm based here for now. And yeah, otherwise, this has just been so much fun. So thank you again for having me.